Buenas and bananas y todos, colleagues. Welcome back to session. Imina 36 na Legislature in Guam is back in session. We resume on second reading with Bill number 109-36 COR. I recognize Senator Mary Camacho Torres on Bill 109-36 COR.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, everyone. I move to place Bill number 109-36 COR as amended by the Committee on Air Transportation, Parks, Tourism, Higher Education, and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens, introduced by myself and Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz-Barnes, Senator Amanda L. Shelton, Senator Talina Cruz Nelson, Senator Jose Pito Terlahi, Senator Joe S. San Augustin, Senator Frank F. Blas Jr., Senator James C. Moylan, Senator V. Anthony Ada, and Senator Christopher M. Duenas into the third reading file. This is an act to amend Section 13502A of Article 5, Chapter 13, Title 19, Guam Code Annotated, relative to expanding the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act to include 911 service providers, and to further amend Section 13505 of Article 5, Chapter 13, Title 19, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the inclusion of adoption agencies in the chain of custody for infants relinquished under the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act, and to require the distribution of materials attached hereto as Exhibits A to D, and to further require the adoption and transmittal of written policy and procedures in accordance with the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act. And I wish to speak on the measure further.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 109-36 makes important updates to the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act, which I authored in 2018. It does this first by adding another lifeline for mothers in crisis. While our Safe Haven Act allows distressed mothers to relinquish their baby at an authorized safe haven location, Bill 109 would aid those who may not have the resources or means of transportation to relinquish their child. To this end, those under extenuating circumstances would be able to call 911 and anonymously relinquish an infant to emergency medical service providers for retrieval, ensuring newborns are kept out of harm's way and brought to the hospital immediately. The second update to Guam's safe haven law that this bill makes is the inclusion of adoption agencies in the infant's chain of custody. Now that Guam has a nonprofit adoption services, an adoption agency identified by Child Protective Services would assume physical custody of the newborn, ensuring the infant goes from hospital to a pre-approved adoptive home instead of a foster home. It should be made clear as well that CPS retains control here and that they are the ones who must call the adoption agency of their choice. I know Director Brennan expressed concern for for-profit entities, but Bill 109 does not require CPS to recognize every adoption agency on Guam. It only requires that they maintain a list and contact an agency on the list. Lastly, Bill 109 provides materials attached as Exhibits A to D to ensure staff at authorized safe havens are prepared in the event an infant is relinquished at their facility. It's also an opportunity for someone who may be contemplating relinquishment to see what their legal rights are and what will happen to their child if they pursue that path. So in closing, I just want to emphasize that Bill 109 recognizes that mothers in distress, especially during these pandemic times, should have every available option to ensure their baby is safe and taken care of. Part of that comfort is knowing that their baby will be permanently placed in a safe and loving home. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On Bill number 109-36 COR, is there anyone who would like to be recognized? Senator Taitakui, you are recognized.
Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. I hope everyone had a nice 3-day weekend. Madam Speaker, where we left off on last week was discussing of Bill 108. It did mention safe haven in that legislation. As this Bill 109 mentions adoption agency duly licensed. Madam Speaker, my concern here is on page 5, line 16. Legal is currently right now writing out the amendment for me, but for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and speak on this. And it's very simple, Madam Speaker. This amendment that I'm proffering on line 16 is taking out shall and put may. Madam Speaker, the reason why I'm doing this, well, I'll wait till the amendment comes out and talk a little bit more about adoption agencies duly licensed. Madam Speaker, the conversation, the controversy or the debate back and forth for the last week and a half regarding adoption agencies was because they were not, it says duly licensed on Guam, but it was about adoption agencies. Well, let me backtrack. It's about individuals who can go to Rev and Tax and get a license and become an adoption agency off the bat with no rules, regulations, standards. It also has no rules and regulation standards by public health as well. In fact, Madam Speaker, over the weekend, an article came out by Ohala, and even they said they did not disagree about the need for regulations on Guam. She said, quote, "My personal opinion is, yes, we at Ohala would have loved to have more guidelines set up," unquote. And I believe she sees the point here because their intention is to be a good adoption agency with all bells and whistles to ensure that the children are safe. And they're willing to follow these rules and regulations, even stipulated in an article, because they know that anybody else can do the same. Come into Guam, open up adoption agency, and may not have the same good intentions as they would. So even they said that it was important to have these rules and regulations. And until that time, Madam Speaker, I think we need to be cautious on any kind of amendments that are being made or bills that are being proffered because of this. So, Madam Speaker, in this section, it says, notwithstanding any other provisions of law, this is sorry to regress again, this is actually the amendment in the bill to change it. It says, notwithstanding any of the provisions of law, Child Protective Services shall contact an adoption agency duly licensed under Guam law to take physical custody of the infant, provided that the 48 hours have elapsed and the time of relinquishment by the mother, and the mother has no request for reunification of Child Protective Services under 13506. First of all, I have an issue with the 48 hours, the original law. But at this point, Madam Speaker, anything can happen that can change the decision of the Child Protective Services. Anything can change within that time. A family member could come up and hear that the child was left and would like to assume custody of that child. Most of the time, families are not notified of something like this. So all I'm doing is just changing the shall to may to give that ability for Child Protective Services to make a sound decision before turning it over to an adoption agency, whether pre-approved or not. But when you say shall, my concern, Madam Speaker, is that you have to do it. Child Protective Services has to do it, regardless. So it's a simple amendment. I'm not sure if it's up on the drive yet. So if maybe take a minute, Madam Speaker, to ensure that it's up. It's unless we want to continue on, but I know that some of my colleagues are concerned about not seeing the amendments before we proffer one. So
Can you please repeat the amendment?
sure, Madam Speaker. It's on page 5, line 16, removing the word shall to may.
Okay, the clerks have received it, so it will be up online shortly, but I will entertain debate on changing the word shall to may in line 16. Is there anyone who would like to speak on that motion? Vice Speaker Muñoz-Barnes, you're recognized.
Bananas Isus, Madam Speaker, and to my colleagues. Madam Speaker, I also read the quote in the paper, and I wasn't surprised to learn that this was not the entire statement. Ohala had transmitted to the media, and I have that statement available for any of my colleagues who want it. Their quote in full actually reads, "We at Ohala would have loved to have more guidelines set up before we were formed, but there are guidelines in Guam's current law to protect children and maintain standards and safety." Now, Madam Speaker, I'm sure these women would have loved more specific guidelines for setting up their business because it would have eliminated a lot of the guesswork they dealt with, especially since they were repeatedly ignored by public health to come review their files. But that is not the same thing as what opponents have been pushing on the floor for this session, which is to move the goalposts by putting all adoptions on hold and to public health establishes an entirely new license issuance and fee schedule almost 2 years after the fact. Because if they don't stop this, they know they can at least delay it. I asked my colleagues why they would rather send an abandoned infant into foster care instead of a permanent loving home. And because that's what a no will do to this. Because of that, Madam Speaker, what a no to this bill does is it's not giving an opportunity for our children to at least go to a home that can immediately help. And Madam Speaker, one who has dealt with, in Chamorro we call it poksai. In our culture, Guam has been blessed because we understand that even if they're not our blood and families need to rise to the challenge, we do it. And we love them as much as we love our own children. And I just think that doing this amendment will do more harm than good, so I object.
On the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to be recognized on the amendment to change shall to may on line 16 on page 5? On that amendment? Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, and good morning to my colleagues. I rise in full support of this amendment. I think, when we're talking about Department of Public Health being the regulatory authority, I still stand by that there should be licensing procedures. We may know the current players today as being upstanding entities, but this law goes beyond that. It has a long-lasting effect, and we want to make sure, in the best interest of all parties, that we're dealing with entities that have the same best interest at heart. And I think what we're seeing here is a power grab with this bill, without even listening to the concerns by the public entity, Department of Public Health. I think that there's, obviously we see the huge need for placement of children, but we also need to make sure that all safeguards are in place, even when we're dealing with public entities. And again, in law, in the debates that we've had so far, what is a duly licensed adoption agency? What we see is that a duly licensed agency is similar to any mom and pop store that sells goods. It's similar to other businesses that have to pay GRT. There's nothing in the law for licensure of adoption agencies. And so that is really what I think we've moved away from the real issue with this in the debates thus far. I think it's perfectly reasonable to give Department of Public Health the time needed to develop this. And 180 days is not 2 years. It's actually an expedited time for, when we consider government agencies. That's quite quick. And that's just in a matter within our term. And I think, with all the attention that's brought onto this, I feel that it can be accomplished. And it's something that's quite reasonable. And it's not delaying the process. It's just making sure the time is there to curate and close the gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment? Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of this amendment. As I was mentioning last week, Madam Speaker, I know we're looking at the time frame here and the current language. While we say that there are protective measures currently in Guam law to address protecting these children, we have a tendency to throw this notwithstanding provision, like candy into our legislation and bills that we're putting forth in the legislature, simply to erase everything else, probably not knowing, because by doing this, we don't know what we're erasing in existing statute. And then we're adding that Child Protective Services shall contact an adoption agency. Historically, Child Protective Services, as a government entity working with the courts, has been responsible for these children. There are requirements that they need to meet as well with regards to ensuring the safety and the welfare of the children that come into their custody as a result of whatever the circumstances may be, that a child does not have their birth parents to be able to take care of them and raise them. I think immediately mandating that this child or infant shall go to an adoption agency without a review process with the ASC committee to review it, or whether public health determines that this is the best option. Madam Speaker, you're a mother. For those here that are mothers, for those that are fathers here in the legislature, grandmothers, grandfathers, I don't know myself personally if I could ever make such a big decision in a matter of 48 hours. 48 hours. While I may have a few more, 12 months, maybe to go back and decide or reconsider as to whether or not I want to give my child up permanently, 48 hours is a very short period of time to make a big life-changing decision that maybe at that moment of fear or apprehension or lack of support, trauma, whatever the case may be that a mother or a birth father also may be going through, we're already cutting this process very short with the existing law that requires this 48-hour time frame. Especially, it was mentioned last week, Madam Speaker, I mean, what is the most desired child for adoption? I didn't make this comment. It was made by one of the other members of the legislature. What is the most desired option for adoption? Infants, right? Infants are looked at as the most desired commodity that probably have the best option of immediately being able to get a home versus older children. While we say we're wanting to protect our children and we're wanting to facilitate this process and we're wanting to take these children from unfortunate circumstances into good circumstances and a good caring home, we need to also be careful. We also need to be a little cautious because we are dealing with children. Children that cannot represent themselves, cannot take care of themselves, that are dependent on us in this community because for whatever reason they may not be able to depend on their own birth parents, that we're going to be looking out for their best interest. And there needs to be a process of accountability in this. No one here wants to hold or slow down the process. I mean, comments have been made that the process is very bureaucratic, we're going to have to put all these requirements. Well, we're setting up a new operation in Guam to ask to put structure in place, rules and regulations, Madam Speaker, which are very standard for so many other things in this government that I think we could weigh as not as important as what it is that we're discussing last week and today on the floor. So I think we need to leave that flexibility to Child Protective Services, those that have the expertise, those that have been trained in the field, those that have worked many, many, many years in this process. I mean, we've seen testimony that's been brought forth by those professionals about the need perhaps to even extend the time period that we're looking at. Because we don't want to be in a situation where we're rushing these children out of their families to put them in other families when maybe there's still options still there that they can return back to their original family, which is the desire, if that opportunity is there, and if the home environment is a safe, caring, and loving place for these children to be raised. But my colleagues, we need to be mindful of this. I mean, I'm dumbfounded. I mean, goodness, we spend so much more care with other stuff that is not as important as a child. And we see every week in this community, Madam Speaker, of course, where our children are not being taken care of, where our children are being harmed, and where our children are being abused. And there's nothing wrong because we know the realities out there. We know there are predators out there. We know there are bad people out there. They can put the best face on. Sometimes you can sustain that for a little while, and then you end up finding out that they have been abusive of children. There's nothing wrong with taking the extra time to make sure that these children are in a safe environment. This trying to draw this issue up that, we don't care about these kids, we want to leave them in the system, we don't want to put them in safe, caring homes. That's the furthest thing from the truth, but we want to make sure that the homes they're going to are safe homes. We want to make sure that these homes have been assessed. We want to make sure that these homes are monitored. But we're changing the law now that, oh my goodness, the adoption agency gets to decide that. Have any of these individuals made any type of the required training, experience that's required to deal with these children? I don't know, because there's no requirements in law for any of this stuff. There's no rules and regulations in the law for any of this. That's the one thing we keep going back to. And now, we can't move fast enough. We can't press that accelerator fast enough on the car, Madam Speaker. We might as well get the fastest speed car on the track out there. 0 to 100 miles in 3 seconds, because that's what we're doing here. There's nothing wrong with putting an extra level of care and an extra level of caution, unless we don't believe that the individuals that have been working in public health all these years are people like Terlahi, who have been a professional for so many years that I myself have had the opportunity to work directly with. As I mentioned last week, we worked together on the task force to address the standards and requirements for daycare centers on Guam to make sure that the daycare centers were meeting requirements, the daycare centers were safe and caring environment for our children. Because we have so many working parents on Guam that need to have daycare in order to be able to go and work. You have both mothers and fathers that are working, that are not able to stay home, not like when many of us grew up. When I was growing up, I had the opportunity to spend time with my grandfather because we lived right next to each other. I had time to spend with my most favorite aunt who looked after me as a child. And for a brief time, I even went to a daycare center that was in our village. But a lot of children, we know, Madam Speaker, do not have that opportunity now. So we want to make sure that the environment that they're in, that when we leave our children, we go to work, to earn a living, to take care of our family, that our children are safe. We should provide that same care and protection for children that are being put through the system. Because these are long-term impacts that are going to affect these children. You know, you look at babies that are innocent from the moment of birth, free of sin. They're pure. And then we have the responsibility of making sure that we're going to take care of those good souls that have been brought into the world, our treasure that we have here. What we do all that we do for, why we want to make things better in our community is for these children and the grandchildren and those that are going to follow us. But in our desire for some of us to move so quickly on this and say, oh, the system doesn't work, this is the solution, without these protective measures in place, without the additional review period, to leave that option open, I'm sure public health, if they know they can turn these children over to a good adoption agency, will do so. But I don't know what a good adoption agency is or a bad adoption agency is because we don't have standards. We don't have rules and regulations. We don't have the structure under which we license. We use the word duly licensed. Like that means something. What does that mean when you go beyond it and break down the definition? Duly licensed means I go to Rev and Tax and I get a license. Unless anybody can show me anything in the statute that proves otherwise, I'm still waiting. Put the Finno English in front of me. I don't mind. I can admit if I'm wrong. But I don't see that. And to not put the protective measure of may, we're simply mandating that public health has to turn these children over, particularly infants. We should be concerned because, as mentioned on this floor, infants are the desired commodity. Decisions that are made at these moments in life will impact that child their entire life. And we need to be careful to make sure that the proper officials are in place that are making the proper decisions, because it impacts that innocent child for the rest of their life. Please, colleagues, keep that in mind. It's going to be very hard to listen to anybody talk about the importance of putting requirements and rules and regulations on anything else in this government if we're going to turn a blind eye in doing it with regards to protecting our innocent children that are dependent on us as a community, as a society, to make good decisions on their behalf until they themselves are able to do it for themselves. And with that, Madam Speaker, I stand in support of the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the amendment? Senator Torres, you're recognized on the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I also rise in opposition to the amendment, and I just want to state, as I've stated from the very beginning, the adoption agency's role is limited to finding good parents and homes for these children. Even though an adoption agency finds a home for these children, nothing diminishes public health's role in screening these homes. And I ask my colleagues to please just read the law. If you look at the section that is where the amendment is being proposed, it's very clear if you read to the end that if no agency is identified to take custody, Child Protective Services shall take custody of the infant. Child Protective Services is in full control at every step, Madam Speaker, and I just want to emphasize that.
On the amendment, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the amendment?
Good morning. Speaker Therese Terlahi, you are recognized on the amendment at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment, and I was actually going to make the same amendment or try to make it to change the word shall to may. That CPS may contact an adoption agency to take physical custody of the infant that is relinquished under the Safe Haven Act. And the reason I wanted to change it to may instead of shall is exactly what, because of what the premise of this bill is, that CPS maintains legal custody of these children until custody is changed by the courts, and that it is ultimately responsible for these children, and that it should make a determination for each child as to whether it should go to this one adoption agency or another adoption agency, pre-screened home, or a home that is pre-screened already by CPS. And such as, and we, I think, are trying to prioritize in previous bill, foster homes and things like that. And so CPS also is screening homes. That's what they've always done. And that, so I think that it should be their discretion where this child goes, just because they are the ones able to see all the homes available and make a determination based on the homes. The second reason is because the reason that the child's placed into the hospital, and we're talking about relinquishment of custody from a hospital, is because the law requires these children to go to a hospital after they are under the Safe Haven Act and be assessed for whether, of course, they can take care of their physical needs, any kind of medical needs, and whether they have special needs. And it's CPS's duty to determine the special needs of this child. And I think that's very important. So that's why I think they need to keep discretion. And that if we just say they shall put it into the next home available, that's not allowing them the discretion necessary to match a child's needs with a home or a parent that can provide for those specific needs. And that's why we've always had an entity that has that type of discretion. And so I think by changing it to may, we can keep the intent, of the bill. That is, that we're now putting these adoption agencies into the process. They are an option for CPS to avail of. And of course, CPS can and should adopt the same philosophy that permanent placement is more beneficial than foster placement and changing homes, numerous times. But I think we should allow them to do that they can determine if this is a good match for this particular child, and they will already have known, hopefully, if we put may, they will know who are the adoptive parents available at that adoption agency, who's up next, or however that's going to work, and what's available at any other adoption agency, and what's available under the parents that they have screened themselves. And so I just think if we are leaving legal custody with CPS, and they are continuing to have oversight, that they should have the discretion to match the needs of the child with the parents. And that putting may is not going to harm the intent of this bill. It's actually going to benefit it. It will allow that discretion for CPS and not mandate that they make a placement that is not, that is not going to meet the best needs of the child. So for that reason, I do support the word change from shall to may. I think it should be done in another line as well, further down, the same thing, so that They may contact the next adoption agency on a rotating list maintained by CPS until an agency agrees to take physical custody of the infant. And I just think this is a win-win for everybody. We allow CPS to do its job. We allow these adoption agencies to be involved, to be next in line even, but we never mandate that you get this child automatic, and that the discretion to meet the child's needs is always, always, always available to CPS. So for that reason, I support the amendment, changing the word shall to may, and I think that should be able to, that all the parties should be able to work under that harmoniously. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Speaker Therese Terlahi. Do you have a point of information, Senator Mary? Please state your point of information.
I just want to bring up a point of information. We are dealing with the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act with children who are legally relinquished, who are unharmed, and who are healthy. So I just want to make that very clear, that that's the infant that we're talking about.
Duly noted, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the main amendment as proffered? Speaker Terlahi, do you have a point of information?
Yes, I just want to make a point of information that we have no idea whether they are healthy or not. We don't know that now. That's exactly why they're placed into the hospitals. Otherwise, we would have just mandated placement right away, but we mandate by law that they go into hospitals so that they can be assessed, and that we hope they are healthy, and I, of course, hope that they are healthy, but we don't know that right now. And so that's why, yeah, I think that was not accurate. Thank you.
Duly noted, Speaker Terlahi. Anyone else on the main amendment as proffered by Senator Tidegui? If not, Senator Tidegui, you may close on the amendment.
Sijusmasi, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleagues who spoke on this amendment in favor of it, and the reasons that they put forth on this floor. It's just common sense. It's a safety precaution. It ensures that the child is placed in a home where it's not uprooted again. It's a baby less than 1 month old. Because in Bill 108, there's a section that was discussed heavily. And that section was incorporated into 108 by saying an infant relinquished under the Newborn Safe Haven Act pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 13, Title 19, Guam Code Annotated will not require a meeting under the ASC. Children who are 1 month, babies, infants that are 1 month and older, would require for the ASC to meet and discuss the placement of this baby or child. But a child that is less than 1 month old doesn't have that requirement for the ASC to discuss the child's well-being or the placement. That was in Bill 108. I tried to amend it to strike it out, and it failed. So where is the accountability for our children, or the accountability for the ASC to be there for our children to decide what's in the best interest of that baby? Pre-approved? That's another issue. Pre-approved by the ASC, where they discuss it, where that adoption agency, private company is part of the committee, where it's obvious. We mentioned several times it was a conflict of interest, not only myself, but public health. The deputy director mentioned it was a conflict of interest. But Madam Speaker, this is 48 hours to decide where a child will go, where the word shall means, doesn't matter, they have to give it to an adoption agency. And 48 hours, if a family member finds out the child was left and find out that was my grandchild, that was left at the hospital, that was abandoned. That was my sister's daughter. You have an opportunity at that point to ask CPS to please don't put my relative, my familia, into another family where I can take care of him or her. I can take care of this baby. But based on this, it says shall. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the 48 hours, I think I mentioned this the last time, but I don't know if my colleagues know this, but if a mother leaves her child under the Safe Haven Act, after 48 hours, she no longer has any authority or right to take that child. However, if she does come back and tries to do that, if she does come back and tries to do it, then the confidentiality of the mother will now be open to the public. So it's almost like once I drop my child off, if I change my mind, they're going to expose me for abandoning my child. You've got people who are like women who are having, teenagers having babies, who are just children themselves. 48 hours is not enough time. And then in this law, it says, well, after you drop them off, 48 hours pass. If you change your mind, then we get to expose who you are. That's so disheartening. So at least in this section here, Madam Speaker, what we're trying to do is just give the authority to CPS and what's in the best interest, where they have no conflict of interest. They have no skin in the game other than taking care of our children on this island. That's their job. So I ask my colleagues, please, to remove shall and make it may. And in the event there is a family out there that the adoption agency found one, that everything is in place and CPS is comfortable to give this adoption agency a child, then so be it. But this gives them that option. And let's not take that away from CPS. Let's be the guardian angels of these children as well. And we have that right to do so and the authority to do so by voting yes on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator Terlahi. On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor of the Terlahi amendment, please signify by raising your hand. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails. On the main motion, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the main motion? Speaker Terlahi, I will acknowledge you on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill does some good things, updates to the safe haven law. For example, allowing emergency medical services to also be involved. And I remember the first time I ever saw a safe haven law in practice was, I was in the area of the Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and they, walking, and there's a fire station, and they have a sign. It's like a bronze sign that says this is a safe haven for babies or something. And so I had to go look that up. I was so amazed, like I hadn't heard of it before. And so, you know, we have done a good thing by enacting this law. I think by allowing emergency medical services to also take custody of babies who are relinquished from their mothers who are in distress, that this can also be good. And I think the law is good in that it requires that the babies undergo a medical assessment so that we can take care of them immediately of anything, if they're malnourished, anything that might be happening with them. And then an assessment will be made if they have any other special needs going forward that will have to be addressed. So after the hospital, the babies go to the, then it's up after the hospital, the question is, where will they be placed? And so as we just discussed, you know, CPS normally takes custody of these children and finds a placement for them. And under their current system, they find a foster home or a permanent home, and they, work with the courts to do what needs to be done. But, so this bill would mandate that, without the previous amendment, it would mandate that CPS only has custody of these children for 48 hours, and then they are placed with an adoption agency. And placement in a permanent home may be the right thing to do under certain circumstances, but it may be that CPS, determines that, I don't know, I just think that they need to have the discretion to decide what the circumstances are presenting to them and whether, they can meet the special needs of the child. And that we've, discussed ultimately that we want adoptions and placement in adoption agencies to be monitored by CPS for a period of time. And so I would ask that we amend the bill to remove subsection E that mandates a hospital to transfer custody of the baby to an adoption agency. And because I just don't think that this part is, it's either intentionally trying to bypass CPS, and otherwise it's not necessary, because if CPS has custody, CPS can determine, just like in subsection D, to place that child in, an adoption agency screened home, or another adoption agency screened home, or a CPS screened home, or anything like that. So I just think that CPS should be the ones to tell the hospital where to transfer physical custody of the child. And they do that now, and that they should continue to do that. And I don't think in the testimony on the bill that they had asked that they be relieved of that responsibility. They said that they have seen cases, or that they were concerned about cases where mothers, and our safe haven law even contemplates, where mothers might not permanently intend to give up the child, but they were severely depressed for a period, and or other circumstances. And so I just think if we can continue to allow CPS to maintain the custody, to place where they deem is best, working with these adoption agencies and anyone else who wants to work with them, that they will do the right thing for this child. And that they've said to us repeatedly that when they do permanent placements, their number one priority is family. They try to find a family that will adopt this child. It's a little bit different under safe haven because we might not know the identity of the child. So Still, I think CPS can work with those circumstances and they can easily determine that an adoption agency, the home that they have chosen, is the best. And so I just think this respects that process. It gives all of us an assurance that that all the needs of the child are being addressed. So I'm talking about the subsection E, part of my amendment on line 26 of page 5 onto the next page. Is just to delete that paragraph that says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the hospital shall transfer physical custody of the infant to the adoption agency identified by CPS. If no agency is identified to take custody, CPS shall take custody of the infant. This is another thing, right? CPS does their own home screenings as well, and those should be, I think, equally, put into the mix and not just prioritize adoption agency placements. So, and I really do sincerely believe that they can work together, and I think that this amendment would allow them to do that and would not make any delay or make any harm to the child in the meantime. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just on a confirmation and to my colleagues here. So the amendment literally is just to delete subsection E, because the amendment as proffered that's on, it says it starts on line 15, but because that amendment did not pass, the deletion would only be for sub-item E. Am I correct?
Yes, right now I'm separating them, so I'm just dealing with a subsection E right now.
Thank you. On the amendment on deletion of subsection E, which would be on line 26, page 5 to 6. Senator Mary Torres, I understand, I saw your hand up. You are acknowledged at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm rising to a point of information. I just want to point out that notwithstanding what might be said or implied, the screening of adoption homes, prospective adoption homes, is always done by a social worker. The legal custody of any child relinquished under the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act is always under Child Protective Services, Department of Public Health and Social Services. The physical custody and the legal custody are two different things. But I just want to make sure that my colleagues are well aware that Child Protective Services, the social worker, is the person that screens the homes. So there's no such thing as the selection of a home, an appropriate home for a placement of a child, bypassing the purview and the absolute oversight of public health. And so, that I just want to make that clear, that in no way is public health not in control. The legal custody will always be with public health until the adoption is completed and finalized. And again, public health and the courts are very much a part of the adoption process, which is very clearly set out. So, please don't misunderstand and think that somehow an adoption agency can bypass that, because they cannot. It's always public health and the social worker that inspects and approves the home for placement. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to make that point of information.
So, Senator Torres, on the proposed amendment as proffered by Speaker Terlahi, is that a registration in opposition or just the point of information to that?
Well, I will object if no others will.
Okay. On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak on Speaker Terlahi's amendment? If not, Senator Terlahi, then Senator Brown. Senator Terlahi, on the Speaker's amendment, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I stand in full support of this amendment. It covers much of what I said in the last amendment that we tried to proffer. But I think, Madam Speaker, it's clear to know that, not only can individuals who want to give up their child, or if a child should come into the hands of CPS, that it allows them to do their own screening process in a family's home. Not everybody will go to an adoption agency, because in some places it costs money. I remember when I brought up last week about the Marshall Islands, the issue of Marshall Islands, and what happened there, where, mothers were given $10,000, but then they were sold in the States for $40,000, these children. So a lot of people will go to CPS because it won't cost anything. I'm not sure if this Ohala is charging anything. They say a nonprofit organization, but I don't know how they're going to sustain themselves, maybe through donations. I'm not sure. We really don't know because there's really nothing in the standards that require them to list anything as this company, as we've been talking about for a week, about rules and regulations and standards, both on the revenue tax side as well as public health. But I think by removing this, Madam Speaker, CPS still has that control. It was mentioned that they always have that control, they always do the screening process, but if you look at Bill 108, there's sections in here that allow the adoption agency to be the one to monitor a child when it's placed in a home. To monitor a child that's been placed in a home by the adoption agency. There's a section in 108 that allows them to do it. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring the safety of our children. That's all this amendment will do to help relinquish that. I mean, the prior amendment would have done the same thing, but even more so, to give that ability to CPS to make that decision. You got to ask yourself, why object to something like this if CPS is in control at all times? Then why object to this? Doesn't make any sense. The point is that we're making sure that it's clear in the law. That's all, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, Senator Tadegui. On the amendment, Senator Joanne Brown, you were recognized on the Speaker Terlahi amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment proposed by Speaker Terlahi. We remindedly and consistently being told that Child Protective Services maintains, legal responsibility of a child. But the physical custody is even more important, is who has physical custody of that child and who's determining that that child is in a safe environment. Especially mandating that that child will go from the hospital to an adoptive home. A little different from our discussions publicly in recent years about foster homes and certainly the challenges that we have on Guam and having enough permitted foster homes and foster families that can take in children. We're aware that the demand is exceeding the supply of foster homes in our community. And certainly taking on the responsibility of a child is a very, very big responsibility. When you think about it, could I be a foster parent? Could I take the time from my schedule and also raising my child? Could I be a foster parent? There's a lot of responsibility in that. But now we're even bypassing that whole process and we're going directly to an adoption family. Instead of a foster family, we're going directly to an adoption family. And I don't doubt, Madam Speaker, that there are many families probably on Guam that would want to adopt a child, especially if they don't have children or they have more love to give than they have their own children. Some people have their own children and will adopt children as well because they have the capacity and support to do it. But on Guam, you hear the circumstance for whatever reason. I'm sure the courts and those involved in Child Protective Services have a lot more experience, obviously, to talk about this issue as to why the courts themselves do not rush to have these children adopted, as to why they stay in the foster system. Is the desire there to try to reunify these children with their families or immediate family member that can come in and intercede and take responsibility for a child that perhaps the birth parents are unable to take care of? It's very different. I'm assuming the adoptive family is intending on wanting to adopt a child. I assume that's why they're identified and called the adoptive family versus the foster family. These are very big decisions, Madam Speaker, that we are trying to make here with this bill, of possibilities that are endless, that we ourselves do not know ultimately what the outcome is. We all want to see children in safe, loving environments, whether hopefully with their family, if they're not their birth family, then another caring family that can give them the support. I think we've repeated that over and over again. But now we're taking the physical custody of children from the hospital, particularly infants. That's at the top of the list, the most desired commodity. And immediately we're going to put them in an adoptive home that has been pre-screened, we say, from public health. But then also in the previous legislation, should it pass, is really almost at the discretion of the adoption agency. The adoption agency, my colleagues, that have no rules and regulations under which they operate, under which they can be measured to determine that they are safely providing the environment review of homes that children are being placed in. Keep that in mind, my colleagues. Every single week we hear and read about the abuse of children in this community, even from their own families, unfortunately, even from the hands of parents that should be loving and caring. I don't think any of us can look at that and not be disgusted, angered, frustrated when we see and hear of these stories. So in our desire to do good deeds in our community and give these children a safe environment, by all means, let's make sure that the home they're being placed in is a safe home. I mean, at one end, we're bashing public health because they cannot provide all these services. They're too bureaucratic. They're not taking care of these children in a responsible manner. At the other end, oh, they still have custody, legal custody. Well, legal custody is nice. That's on paper. That's like a restraining order, Madam Speaker. It's like a restraining order that is useless when the person that's committing crime against you is right in front of you harming you. What good is that piece of paper? And we've just recently seen the dangers in our community of what happens with that. So let's not talk about, oh, legal custody versus physical. Well, physical custody to me is pretty important. Probably as a parent, the one thing that preoccupies you, particularly when your children are underage, is where are they and who has them? Are they in school? You want to make sure they're safely in school. If they're out in the front yard playing, you want to make sure they're safely out in the front yard playing. But this rush to transfer all of this into an adoption agency, and we have the adoption agency, hey, we don't mind rules and regulations, hey, sure, bring them to us. And yet we're the body to make sure that happens, but we're ignoring it. I'm dumbfounded. I've dealt with many issues on the floor of the legislature over the years, Madam Speaker. This one dumbfounds me. And I'm not going to claim I'm the smartest knife in the kitchen, the sharpest knife, the brightest light in the kitchen here, but wow. Wow, 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 wow. We want to accelerate this at a speed that is just beyond imagination here, especially in a circumstance from a birth mother even, that we don't even know the state that that mother may be in or the pressure that my mother may be in at the time she may decide to have to give up her child. That's got to be the heaviest decision one can make in one's life. And the risk she has if she decides on the 50th hour that, oh no, I maybe my family support wasn't there and I'm not doing much better and I would like to keep my child. That mother will go through exposure. And not just exposure that she gets identified to the public. That mother has to go through the whole system and the whole review to make sure she legally now qualified to take back possession of her child to which she has given birth to. This is not a safe, comfortable system that we're creating here. And like I said, I can't even make decisions about things of physical possessions. What more a child? And have 48 hours to do it. And then if my child gets placed in the hospital, my child's going to be taken to an adoption agency. For what purpose? What if the decision gets made that that child gets returned back to its family, or there's an immediate family member, a blood family member that steps forward to the court and says, I will take responsibility for that child. Then does that child get taken out of that adoptive family that I assume desires to adopt a child, raise a child? What are we putting that poor family through as well emotionally? What are we putting them through emotionally when there's hope and dream of wanting to keep this child and raise this child as their own? That kind of love, Madam Speaker, is probably, you can't measure that. That would be so painful if I was the adoptive family. And I'm not saying in my life, gosh, if the opportunity presented itself, if I could adopt another child, maybe I would if I could adopt a child. Maybe God's telling me, hey, you got more capacity and more responsibility. You can take care of this child. I'm bringing this child to you. I would be heartbroken if that child were taken away from me. It wouldn't even matter if it was a day, a week, a month, a year that I had that child to raise. I would be heartbroken. I'll be wondering the rest of my life how that child is. We don't want to bring harm on either side, Madam Speaker, to the birth parents or to the adopted family. We just want to make sure the process is done in a way that it's not so accelerated so that the outcome ultimately is what's in the best interest of the child, and hopefully the parent or parents, be it they're the biological parents or the adoptive parents or whatever the case may be, that it's in the best interest of that child. These changes to accelerate this process to an entity that is undefined, I'm dumbfounded. I am totally dumbfounded that we would allow that to happen without putting a structure in place because, it's going to take time, it's going to require more. My goodness. There's nothing wrong with taking the time to invest. I'm sure if the administration is so supportive of this bill, because they don't share the same view towards the most vulnerable, towards the unborn. But they certainly have the power, Madam Speaker, as any administration does, to prioritize, to direct the Director of Public Health to facilitate these rules and regulations, and get on it now. They can move that process as fast as they want to. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. By all means, they're the administration, they're all powerful. How are we going to let bureaucracy get in the way of that? We know we can make things move as fast in this government as we want, and we can slow it down when we want. So how can we let that be an issue in wanting to protect these children, in simply ensuring that ultimately where they end up is a good and safe place? If it's not in the home to which they're born into biologically, then by all means. However, whatever the form or shape of that is, we want these children to be safe. We want to make sure that there are processes and procedures in place that we can ensure accountability. We have none of that in place, but now we're saying these infants are going to be taken and children are going to be taken from the hospital to an adoptive family. We can talk about legal custody all we want, Madam Speaker. Physical custody of that child is what is very important. Where are they? Who has them? And how well are they being taken care of? And by whom are they being taken care of? Unfortunate, but I'll keep repeating myself as much as I need to on this floor because I'm just dumbfounded, my dear colleagues. For those of you that will not address this issue, but will address this on least important things on this floor, I said there's nothing more in this session we'll discuss that's important as this issue. We're being irresponsible if we proceed with this without addressing these concerns. The government is not perfect. Good Lord, we're far from it, Madam Speaker. But in our society, this is the structure that we have created to address these concerns. And now we want to throw away all the years of support and expertise that is invested in this process from those that have the real world experience, that have lived this issue for many years, that have the experience and the wisdom to provide good recommendations, and we totally ignore it. Because we want to play the politics. Because I can't think of any other logical reason as to why we're not doing the responsible thing. But we can't do it fast enough, Madam Speaker. We're going to vote on this bill, and the governor's going to sign it, and we're going to go to the signing ceremony and smile. But I'll tell you, the first time a major problem comes up, oh, well, wow, that's going to be interesting, colleagues. Who's going to stand up to be counted? From GMH to an adoptive family that's being overseen by an adoption agency that has no rules and regulations that govern them. How unfortunate. Nevertheless, Madam Speaker, I still rise in support of this amendment that's been provided by Speaker Terlahi.
Anyone else on the Speaker Terlahi amendment? If not, Senator Sabina, you may proceed on the amendment. Senator Shelton.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I rise in support of this amendment. What this section says, it's notwithstanding any other provision of law. So that does, it negates what's in law, and this takes precedence. And what it further states is the hospital shall transfer physical custody of the infant to the adoption agency identified in the previous section. So what does that previous section state is that 48 hours have to have elapsed, and the mother, there is no missing persons report. So that's the bare requirements for the hospital to transfer the custody of an infant to an adoption agency. And should, again, further, the bill states that if no agency is identified to take custody, then CPS will be the default. So I just want to point out something, a potential problem with this. And we see cases against different jurisdictions, like California, where they were sued for fraud because there was a lack of full disclosure of placing a baby with adoptive parents. And so in this case, the full disclosure, was important for the adopting parents because they're opening their homes, their financial resources, and their hearts to a child, and as a matter of basic fairness are entitled to full disclosure. More importantly, full disclosure by the adoption agency ensures that a child needing prompt intervention and treatment will receive it, and that untreated conditions which could be aggravated can and will be resolved. And so in looking at certain ailments, sometimes they don't manifest until later on. 48 hours. Do we know what this child, we know about genetic diseases that don't manifest until later on. It takes months before it shows. And the baby in 40 hours is not producing their antibodies. They have passive immunity. And so it's really difficult to assess a child at that young an age in 48 hours to know what physical ailments that baby may have. And so again, I think I rise in support of this amendment because we need to move carefully in ensuring that the baby's fully assessed as physically, and that we know then what is the proper household or the parents that can adopt a child, knowing the full physical assessment, having the full physical assessment. I think, that is critical for all parties again, for the baby, for the parents, having that full knowledge, knowing what they can provide to support and nurture this child. So I rise in full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Perez. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? On Speaker Terlahi's amendment? Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues for rising in support of the amendment and for their articulated reasons. And again, I think this amendment, if CPS and these agencies are going to work together, that this amendment to delete this paragraph is very compatible with that goal. And that if CPS is truly in control of the process, despite this language in the bill, then this language in the bill would not be necessary, because CPS would be determining that the best placement for that child is with the home listed by the adoption agency. They would have made that determination in advance. There's no ASC meetings after the child's placed in safe haven, but hopefully they have pre-screened and predetermined all the adoption agency homes during other ASC meetings. So I just think, I agree with the previous speaker that it wouldn't be necessary, this language, if that notwithstanding any other provision of law, if they intended to be in harmony with CPS. This negates that presumption that CPS is determining which home is the best placement for this child. And I think this is going to become more problematic, when we have more than one adoption agency in line, while we have CPS screened homes as well, and that we by law are mandating a priority. Without knowing anything about the baby, we here are going to be mandating that the next child placed in safe haven is going to go to this adoption agency. I think that's way beyond what we should be doing, and we should be allowing CPS, the ASC, to be making that determination. And they can do this all as much as possible in advance before knowing, they can screen all the homes, but ultimately the decision should be theirs, and we should not, I think, be setting the priority in law that before any other home that CPS has identified for adoption, that we are going to mandate that the babies go to OHALA agency first. Again, if they are intending to work together with CPS, then clearly this amendment will not harm that. It would allow them to continue to work together. It would allow them to create a list of pre-screened homes that are approved by CPS that are waiting in line for babies, just like the other pre-screened homes that did not go through that one agency are waiting in line for babies. So I think, again, that my amendment to delete this paragraph is no harm if they intend to work together. If they intend to bypass CPS, then that's clear from the language to me. That's in the bill right now, and that's why I'm trying to remove that, because it definitely clearly delineates that notwithstanding any other law, notwithstanding CPS's authority in this situation, notwithstanding CPS's ability to determine the best placement of the child, the hospital shall transfer custody of the infant to the adoption agency. And so I think let's just delete this paragraph and let CPS and these adoption agencies work together to get best placement of the child. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker Terlahi. There has been an objection to the Terlahi amendment. Please signify your vote by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Speaker Terlahi, you are still recognized.
I guess, again, I would like to support this bill. I think it has a good intent, but because we can't change these languages that are prioritizing a certain adoption agency over any other discretion that CPS might have in these situations, I just can't help but wonder why. And I can't see why, if these adoption agencies intend in good faith to work with CPS, why forcing CPS to give them babies is in the benefit of anyone. That we should allow CPS to determine always, based on the needs of the child, where is the best home for that child, and whether adoption homes that have been waiting with CPS are better placements than the ones that the adoption agencies have lined up. Why should one be prioritized over the other? I'm all for waiting lists, perhaps. I don't know. I'd like to see what they're going to come up with, but I am not. I don't feel comfortable that we as a legislature are going to say this placement, without knowing anything about it, is better for a child than that placement. Otherwise, we would be telling courts to do that. We would tell them, make a list, and anybody in the list, just do that. But they always have to check and make another determination, an independent assessment of the homes and the child, and make sure that they both, it's the benefit of the child to get into that particular home. And that's all I'm asking for this bill. I very much like to support the other parts of this bill, but I'm very uncomfortable with us by legislation mandating an adoption agency over any other placement that CPS has outlined. And, for example, all the families on Guam that go through CPS for adoption. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On the bill, Vice Speaker Munya Barnes, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of this Measure 106-36 COR as authored by the good Senator from Santa Rita. Madam Speaker, the bill intends to expand the Newborn Safe Haven Act by including emergency medical personnel to take custody of relinquished infants, and further amends custody requirements to allow existing adoption agencies identified child protective services to assume physical custody of newborns. Madam Speaker, this bill also finds that since the enactment of the Safe Haven law, proper procedures were not met or children were placed in foster custody until permanent placement was arranged, which would take months. Amending custody requirements to include adoption agencies would place infants in pre-approved adoptive homes. Madam Speaker, this bill further adds the guidance, questionnaire, and procedures for safe haven facilities to ensure the necessary safety and security for placement of the child. Child Protective Services have 30 days from the enactment to implement these administrative requirements and materials. Madam Speaker, I think that working closely with our entities, working closely with the nonprofit organization, working closely with the families in need and those who want to provide this support, I think that this is a good measure moving forward. It strengthens the bill that was previously passed, and I just want to say that I rise in full support, and I hope that my colleagues will help support the efforts because it is about our children. And for those needing it, adoption is an option, and there is a place, a nonprofit organization who will work closely with the administration agency to make sure that the needs of a child is taken care of. So I ask my colleagues to help me support these efforts, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to rise in support of 109-36 COR. And thank the good author for making me a co-sponsor for the efforts. Sana Masi.
Senator Maasi. On the bill, is there anyone else who would like to speak on the bill? Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Jesus Masi, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of Bill 109, and I do appreciate the debate and the discussion we've been having on the floor. It's kind of interesting because when I went through the public hearings, and of course even on the introduction of the bill, as I was grateful to be a co-sponsor to both bills, really. So I did a lot of research. Kind of interesting in the research that I did on legal adoptions and the adoption procedures on Guam. One of the law offices that I read their presentation, you know, some of the discussion on the floor here was answered in their offering of their services, particularly when it came to international adoptions, which are very cumbersome. And as was mentioned by the author, the discussion on the Hague requirements, and on this particular law office's website, they show that 3 to 6 years is a typical waiting time for an international adoption. And I bring that up, Madam Speaker, because we know that legal adoptions facilitated by law offices and others, I mean, have been happening on Guam for decades. The procedure of trying to find a loving home for a child who's relinquished for whatever situation exists for an expectant mother is something that has been happening. I'm sure anyone who would seek the services of an attorney probably has a fair amount of resources to be able to go through this process, you know, in a private manner, utilizing family law. You know, the spirited discussion, which I agree, shall, may, or your amendment, Madam Speaker, I'm just hoping, and I'm praying actually, that after this process, you know, we haven't gone through the process of kind of pitting entities against each other or competing interests. You know, entities such as a nonprofit that will come to Guam, has come to Guam, to try to help a system that, even if you read the intent of this bill, it's demonstrated on the intent that it is an overburdened system. We talked about, you know, the pre-approval requirement for these adoptive homes, and the agency is the facilitator to begin with. I understand the attachment to a baby, to children. I just wonder sometimes, though, you know, we look at when CPS has to place these children in foster care homes. I mean, on an overburdened system? I don't know. We talk about the best interest of the child, right? That's why the court eventually has the final say. We're talking about a legal process. We're talking about relinquishment where there is and there has been that realization that these children are more than likely going to end up somewhere other than their natural parents' environment. Policy like this does require this kind of discussion. I'm hoping that the follow-through is such that a very harmonious relationship is, or maybe the relationship that already is harmonious, as one of the discussion points that was made on this floor as well was prior to CPS being taken over by executive order by Department of Youth Affairs to clear the exorbitant amount of cases. There was already work being done for over 14 months by the previous administrator with this particular current nonprofit that we have on Guam. They were asked to come in and help. Ms. Nauta and others with Harvest Home and others, they were asked to be part of the process of the overwhelmed system. It's not a discussion of whether or not we're beating up on a bureaucracy or not, or favoring an adoption agency. It's, are we doing everything we can as a government to serve the principles involved, which are these children and babies? That's what we're going to have to decide in the final analysis. I cannot imagine any system that's going to work effectively without constant communication within the regulatory agencies that have the mandate by law to protect these children, and legal entities who would provide adoptive services, which is already going on right now with the fortunate few who retain the services of law offices. The website that I read was the most joyful, as the law office lays it out, the most joyful experience of trying to become a parent and provide a loving home. I'm absolutely sure they're abiding by every current regulatory process on this island. I wouldn't think any officer of the court or any office would risk disbarment or loss of their privilege. I hope we can take that anaphemalic process and work together to ensure that what we're trying to do, particularly under Safe Haven, where we have had experiences on Guam where, unfortunately, children have been abandoned. I pray that that's the outcome, because I know all involved are good people. I don't see bad guys in this system. I know there are bad outcomes and bad things that happen in terrible environments, as many of my colleagues or some of my colleagues have spoken on the floor with regard to things that we do read about and needing to protect our children. But I think we're talking about a system right now primarily that people have absolutely the best of intentions, and that the system has to vet this process to begin with. You vet the process of a foster home, you vet the process of adoptive homes. Once again, it was the best reading of the law and the process on this particular legal office's presentation. Explained all the processes and all the laws required, and all of the home requirements, the court's duty and everything else to see through this process. So, once again, Madam Speaker, policy that moves forward, dealing with our most precious, our children, our people, deserves this type of debate. I still remain confident that all concerned can work together to make sure the process works for the best interest of all. Si Diyos masi, Madam Speaker.
Si Diyos masi. On the bill, 109-36, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the bill? If not, then I'll ask the sponsor to close on the bill. Or Senator Brown, are you raising your hand to speak on the bill? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. There's a couple hands now, so Senator Brown, then Senator Perez. Senator Brown, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise, and I don't rise in support of this bill, Madam Speaker, not because I'm against the process of trying to get children into caring, loving, and safe homes. I think we recognize the challenge that has existed in our community. Obviously, we've seen the need for foster families and not having enough foster families in our community. What concerns me in this process, and I know I've repeatedly said it on this floor, but you know what, I'll continue to say it. Adoption, an adoption agency and that process is an option, certainly. I think we welcome those that, we hear that OHALA is the main organization, I guess, that has been spoken about that has come together to help facilitate. And I don't think anyone can speak against the importance of the desire and the heart and the care that those members want to put in place with their adoption agency. But we are interjecting the adoption process really into the decision-making process of what we are to do with these children. Some may argue, Madam Speaker, that even the timeline that's allowed for a birth mother to make a decision on whether or not she wants to keep her child is a very short time frame. We've had these professionals in CPS who have come out publicly and stated their concern with regards to that time frame, that perhaps that process should be just a little longer because of the challenges or stress a birth mother may be under at the time she makes the decision. That's a very short period of time to make a life-changing decision. And it's a very short period of time that mother, unless she wants to go through public exposure, if she changes her mind, and then not only that, she has to go through the whole review process as if she's an outsider to that child, of course. Then she gets caught up in that whole system of having to go through all that to even be able to get her child back. Let's say she decides that I can raise this child, and maybe she has the support of her family to help do it. Nobody's arguing that there aren't unfortunate circumstances that slip through the process. But to put a child in an environment that has no rules and regulations, no formal standard structure that is transparent in this community, and to our people, we're not doing the responsible thing either. We're not making the challenge and problems go away by doing this, including to the point that even Child Protective Services, we speak of them glowingly at one end, then we bash them at the other, and then at the other end we take away their ability to even have a say on where this child goes if the child is taken to dirt. In this case, more than likely, because again, the most desired commodity are infants. We're interjecting the adoption agency in making those type of decisions, rather than who we have entrusted so far under law is Child Protective Services. Of course, ultimately, they make those presentations to the courts. We're not trying to stop that process or stop the process of taking these children from undesirable circumstances into a caring, loving home. I think we all agree that's the end result of what we want to see. But when we make these changes, when we use the word, Madam Speaker, notwithstanding, which, wow, that has become such a standard these days because we don't do legal research. We just simply want to put the word notwithstanding. We don't even know what we're erasing. We don't know on the floor of this legislature what we are erasing. What I do know is we are taking, be it OHALA or any other adoption agency that desires to set up on Guam, because all they got to do is go up to Revenue Tax and get a business license right now, is we're transferring a large portion of what was not the case before into the decision-making process of the adoption agency. The adoption agency, my colleagues, once again, that does not have any rules and regulations and legal structure for review, other than, oh, public health's going to go review them. Public health is going to go audit them. What does that mean? What standards are they required to meet? What level of training or experience are being required of these individuals in these adoption agencies that are making these decisions for these children? I have yet to hear and see what those requirements are. Unless, colleagues, you know better than me and you know what they are. Because we are legalizing what had not existed before. So how do we have rules and regulations for something that didn't exist in structure here in our community? Those are the issues. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day in terms of what it is that I am concerned about, that some of our other colleagues here on the floor, that you, Madam Speaker, have stated on the floor of this legislature that you're concerned about. We're not trying to stop any process, but we simply want to make sure that these children are in good hands. I don't think this legislation is being created just for one adoption agency that has publicly come forth, apparently has publicly come forth and made statements that they would be welcoming of requirements that they need to meet, which I think is a very good thing. But the fact that we don't have that in place and yet we're changing by law and we're putting them, injecting them directly into this decision-making process. We're having them sit at the table to make decisions on our children. By law, this is what we will do if we pass this bill, and the governor, apparently she's going to sign it. Colleagues, I hope you really think about this when you make a decision, because wow, to me, like I said last week, politics is rearing its ugly head. When our people wonder when we make decisions that are probably not the best and brightest, and they wonder, how did that happen? That doesn't make sense to me. More than likely, Madam Speaker, because politics has reared its ugly head. And it's unfortunate, because what otherwise could have been a very good bill, if it had these inclusions in it, I would have no problem voting for it. I wouldn't even be out here arguing against it. I'd be up here speaking for it. But the resistance to address these very fundamental concerns and standard requirements that we have for some very basic things in our community. My goodness, the cosmetologists have to go through all these requirements to get licensed, to practice, to cut our hair, and do our fingernails, and put our streaks of whatever, and pluck our eyebrows. But we don't even put this in place for a adoption agency that's going to have custody and now determine the direction and maybe future of our children. It's unfortunate, Madam Speaker. I hope this is not, and probably this will not be the end of the story. I don't think it can be the end of the story. I certainly hope follow-up legislations to address these very basic concerns so that overall we can have some sense of comfort that an organization that wants to be an adoption agency on Guam is something more than our so-called duly licensed. Duly licensed. What the heck does a duly licensed? Well, I'm sure every business on Guam that has a business license can say, I am duly licensed. I'm on record at Revenue Tax because I got my business license. I am duly licensed. But we're going to put this in place, and we're going to put this adoption agencies, because there may be more than one. I mean, it doesn't mean that this ends and begins with just one adoption agency. Now that this is here, I guess somebody else can set up another adoption agency. We're going to put them at the table. We're going to have them make these decisions. We're going to have them take custody, physical custody of these children. But they don't have any requirements under law that they need to meet. That's what we're doing, Madam Speaker, with the passage of this bill. And I think that's irresponsible of us to allow that to happen. And with that, Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition because of these concerns that I have raised, which had otherwise, those concerns been included in this bill, I certainly would otherwise have not had a problem voting for it. With that, Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to Bill 109. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Perez, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have some questions to the author of the bill.
Please state your questions.
She's not present right now.
Sergeant of Arms, if you could get the sponsor. We'll take a 30-second recess. We're going to recess and resume at 2 p.m. today. We're on recess until 2.